Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Jeremy Korst, who is president of GBH Insights. Hey, Jeremy, how are you doing?
Adrian, good to hear your voice live versus just hearing it through the speakers in the car.
Thank you. So, Jeremy, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Currently, like I said, I'm president of a marketing strategy and analytics firm called GBH Insights. Mm-hmm. I really came to the role, though, through professional career in technology. Started out more in product management, then product marketing, and worked my way into a CMO role. And through that journey, just was excited about a lot of the trends I saw and opportunities. One of the things we do at GBH Insights is we have very deep engagement with the academic community, and in particular, the chairman of the marketing department at Wharton.
Okay.
It's one of the co-founders. And so we get to do a lot of work trying to take advantage of both industry and customer trends, as well as taking some of the leading academic thought and making it practical to CMOs and organizations today.
Okay. So that's perfect. Now, the reason why we arranged to talk today is because you recently shared with me your view on sort of 9 trends shaping the future of marketing and CX in 2019. Now, we all know that the world loves a list. So I want to know is, can you tell me about how this list, these trends came about, and how you came up with them before we get stuck into them, because I actually think there's some really interesting stuff in them. So tell us how the list developed or how it emerged first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am a believer in market research at the core, and so my research, and I've had the opportunity over the years, and particularly most recently, where I'm involved as a board member and angel investor in the very small technology, both B2B, B2C. Of course, through professional work we do at GBH, we work with some larger brands, mm-hmm. and then also get to interact a lot with peers at various conferences, mm-hmm. and like I said, in the academic community, so get to engage directly with those. So through a combination of those various data points, these are things that I've come to sum up. These aren't necessarily any of my independent ideas, but just some common themes that I'm hearing discussed and being grappled with. I think it's going to be highlighted in 2019.
Okay, and so can you give us a bit of a snapshot of each of these trends? Because there's 9 of them, and so let's kind of why don't we just go through them, and as we go through them, perhaps you can tell me why you think they're important and what firms should be doing about them. Because actually, some of these kind of ones, they might be, I guess, they might be familiar to people, and actually that's no bad thing, because I think that the trap that we fall into when people talk about trends is that trends need to be new, and actually discount the continuing stuff. If we can go through them sort of one by one, and we'll kind of delve into them and then explore some of the links and stuff. But if you could also tell us why you think they're important and what firms should do about them, then that set the scene really well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think overall, from the macro lens to look at some of these trends, to your point, the trends themselves, particularly for people that are downloading and listening to a podcast like yours, are most likely early adopters and very hopefully conscious of these things, to your point. But the macro lens, I think, is pretty important too. And right now we're living in a period where there's lots of convergence overall in the academic and marketing thinking community. There's a better understanding of neurology, psychology, marketing, economics, and essentially customer behavior,
right?
And how that relates to brand and customer experience, and just how important a consistent brand customer experience and that strategy comes together. So that's one part. And then, of course, is just the convergence of technology overall, and whether that is the online versus offline experience, and moreover, the understanding and better understanding we're getting that there aren't those separations anymore, and we will increasingly live in a world, that may be called omni-channel today, but so we think about technology advances, having more ambient intelligence around us, whether we're at home or out and about, and just how marketers and organizations and brands continue to grapple and deliver an effective customer experience and brand in that converging world.
Right.
And the first trend that we have on that, I think, is just a really good exemplar for both of those trends. And that's the clicks to bricks to clicks phenomenon that we are seeing here. That, of course, we were talking just a couple of years ago, we've been talking about just the rise of online e-commerce, et cetera. And of course, this holiday season, we're already seeing just the convergence of the type of activity and customer experience, about whether it's buying online and picking up in store, or the continued rise of traditional e-commerce, or even things like Starbucks, a brand like Starbucks, where we see increasing percentage of the customer base purchasing via mobile app, picking up in store, and now even just in the last few weeks, announcement of agreement with Uber to deliver Starbucks wherever the customer may want.
Yes.
And so that's an exciting opportunity, I think, for a brand. It is most definitely for a brand, but really understanding the target customer, making conscious choices to deliver the type of experience and brand promise that that target customers come to expect across those various channels is increasingly challenging, but also increasingly a major opportunity for brands to differentiate themselves.
And do you think that the more traditional retailers are finding that transition difficult, because what they end up doing is they end up trying to build an online business which is separate to the traditional bricks and mortar business, and actually they can't exist separately. They have to be completely integrated from the start. Because I remember thinking about this or reading about this years and years ago with a retailer in the States. REI, which you'll know, is an outdoor retailer, and they were so ahead of the field when it came to their online and store experience, and that they had their online store and their online stores and their warehouses and their actual bricks and mortar stores all linked together, such that and all their POS systems linked together, such that if you couldn't find something on their online sort of store, it would locate the nearest store that it could where they had the right piece of stock, and then they would message the store and actually have the store send it to you in that sort of way. And they were doing that nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's been some time, and I think REI is another great Seattle-based example of that type of converging customer experience. And to your earlier point, I do think it's a challenge. It's not just a challenge, though, for traditional bricks and mortar retailers. It is also a challenge for born in the cloud virtual retailers that are understanding the importance based on their target customer of whether they need physical retail.
Right.
And in my opinion, what you said was exactly on point, is that the understanding at a brand and company strategy level that these are not separate, that
Yes.
we are serving a common set of target customers that we've defined, that we understand, that we empathize with their needs, and that we're delivering the experience that they expect to be served with based on how and where they are interacting with our brand.
Yeah. And so, I think that's kind of fascinating. I mean, and that kind of leads us on to, I think, the second trend, which I think is then poses a fascinating challenge, because if you're thinking that, well, actually the clicks to bricks to clicks, then you're talking about a very, very different sort of monster, as it were. You're not just traditional retailer, or you're not just digital only. You are this broad thing. And the second trend, if I'm right, is the changing role of the CMO. And it feels like the CMO has to become a bit of a superhero, really.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's no surprise that Spencer Stewart recently published a survey just showing what the attrition rate, voluntary and involuntary, for the CMO role is for these organizations. It's a exciting but also a scary time for the function. It's exciting because, just like we talked about that, and some of the other trends we'll cover, is that the role of the CMO in many organizations is becoming an increasingly strategic partner and a board level role.
Right.
And having to be that voice of the customer within the organization, not the sole voice of the customer, but a key component of that, and understanding the strategy and helping influence the strategy all the way from product ideation, development, delivery, and support, and being a focal point in that strategy is increasing. HBR also just, I think, will publish an article about this, talking about how CMOs have traditionally come from either a brand focus or a product marketing focus or an analytics perspective or a sales support. And if you look at these different types of CMOs, they tend to have gravity in one of those places. But in today's organization, the CMO in the organization needs to have all of those things. And so talking about how, it's like you said, it's a superhero role, the expectation. And of course, there's very few people who can fulfill that. So for the CMO, it's how do they recognize the specific needs across the organization, be able to step into that strategic role and understand the type of leadership team and or external partners they need to build around them to be able to fulfill that increased expectation.
Do you not think that there's also there's also a kind of a question that sits within that, which says, if the CMO, the perfect CMO becomes a superhero because they have to cover so much ground, is there a case to be made for breaking up the role of the CMO?
I think, I consult and advise several organizations that, looking for CMOs and have done that for some time. I don't think, in my opinion, there is this concrete definition of a CMO. It is very organization and context specific. So I do think it varies. That being said, my personal opinion is that strategic role of being at a board level conversation to represent the brand position, not branding per se, but the brand position in the marketplace, and ensuring that the organization is fulfilling that in their prioritization of product development, how they're delivering throughout the entire customer life cycle, is a core essence of today's CMO role, and should not be split between other roles.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm not thinking about kind of being split between other roles. I'm just thinking that if it feels like it's such a superhero role or a superheroine role, then is there is there an argument for saying, well, actually, should it be, rather than split up and partitioned or proportioned across other kind of other members of the executive team? I mean, maybe there should be. Is there an argument that says the CMO as a role, it's just too big, and it might be better if it's served by 3 people at that level rather than just the one, because of the ground it has to cover. Well,
I agree with your underlying point, which is that having a single individual who can cover all of this territory, from deep analytical thinking all the way to creative execution, is very hard, if not the impossible unicorn to find.
Sure.
But I do believe having the organization centered under a CMO, and that and that the organization, looking at the particular strengths of the person who's in the CMO role and ensuring that that person is surrounded by a leadership team that complements them, him or her, in these functions that work together as a strategic marketing organization is what I advise people I'm working with on how to construct the role.
Okay. So let's put that one to one side. Tell me about the third trend that you've identified.
It's just a notion of building a customer-centric and data-driven culture to survive in the market. We're seeing this, of course, the clients that work with us. And we say customer centricity, that's sometimes misinterpreted. In fact, Pete Fader at the Wharton School has just published a second book around what he calls customer centricity. And I really ascribe to some of his teachings there. The customer centricity is the organization making prioritization decisions about which customers they are going to serve best. And in Peter's book, it's about those who can maximize CLV for the particular organization. So it's customer centricity is not necessarily serving all customers equally or trying to be everything to everybody. It's making those conscious decisions of what perception within the minds and hearts of your customers do you want to build, and who are you going to overserve consciously. So getting that type of understanding across the organization is becoming increasingly important because each and every touch point from the organization, from, again, the products we build to the support we deliver over time, needs to be consistent and up to the expectation and perceptions we want to build with the targets, those customers that we're trying to overserve. And that's got to be based on a combination of science and art, but from a science perspective, is how are we using and having a common view of data-driven decision-making across the organization, and that we're playing across the organization from the same playbook strategy and having the same view of the data and expected results.
And so I guess my question around that, I mean, I can see the need for it because we are, I think many companies, being data-driven and trying to achieve better decisions or better outcomes through the leveraging of the data that we can have and collect is essential. I guess my concern with some of these sort of things is that people then they double down only on the data and they forget the accompanying behavior and particularly kind of human and customer sort of insights that come from actually going out and meeting people and talking to them and observing them in the
That's exactly right.
in the world is and it's exactly it's the data that is soft and it's visceral and it's hard to collect, and the challenges is that the data that comes from technology is easy to collect relatively, and yet we end up almost through our natural instincts is defaulting to the things that are easier to do rather than the things that are choosing to do the things that are harder to do. And I guess my question would be is like, how do we inject the hard work into it in terms of where the real visceral insights where people go out and actually talk to customers. I mean, heaven forbid, but actually go and talk to customers either face to face or on the phone or whatever. I mean, how does that get blended into that whole data-driven culture?
Well, I agree with everything you just said, is that I've seen mistakes across the board, but two of the common ones I see is one you just hit on, which is the belief that we live now in a world driven by marketing and other technology that can somehow, on a dashboard or a spreadsheet, enlighten us as to what's going on in the market and the effectiveness of our strategy and how we should change it. That is incorrect. This is some of the really interesting and fun work we do at GBH Insights, which is how do we combine the combination of available internal transactional and customer and other data along with perhaps some observation or even primary market research, as well as also in just engaging with frontline employees. I think being able to go out and actually engage with and try to, the extent possible, put yourself in the shoes of whether it's the front line or the customer, through those types of real human conversations, even in organizations that have really good data, drive so much better insights and understanding. And that's one, to don't rely just on data. The other mistake I see very commonly, even in very large organizations, is dismissing data because it may not be complete. And
right.
So there's this ongoing challenge because of the earlier trends we talked about omni-channel and convergence of technology, and we have different data pools throughout, and perhaps the data are not complete, are all these things. And so there becomes a tendency to dismiss it. Instead, I think the opportunity is to say, what assets do we have? How can we leverage them effectively? And then how do we add on to that through some of these observational or other mechanisms and or in-market testing, et cetera? How do we build that roadmap where we can improve our use of data to inform and drive some of our decisions, but not losing sight of course, we need to keep that art approach, not only the science.
Yeah, and so that kind of brings me. So that's interesting because that brings me on to the next two trends, which you talk about. Kind of, it's like real-time data and analytics, and also kind of VOC, voice of the customer insights, into action in real time. I mean, can you tell me about those two things? Because what I'm really interested in is, I mean, we talk about this idea about real-time data, and it's like always be almost like ready to pounce in many ways. And so my question, I guess, would be is that, I mean, it seems to be rising in, there's more and more people that are talking about it and talking about developing that capability, but is that just almost, or is there a danger that the urgency is getting created because we can do this now with all this data and this technology, or is it that the customer's actually demanding it, or is there a balance between the two things?
Well, I think they are both happening as we as humans and as customers come to expect a different engagement as technology and capabilities advance. Mm-hmm. And so that's ongoing. And then, of course, there are brands that are trying to differentiate themselves by being early adopters of some of the technology and capabilities that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Now, in both those cases, though, it to me is really about, it's got to be centered on who are the customers we're trying to serve, recognizing that those customers are dynamic. They change over time. We all change over time. Being able to have sensing functions within our organization that allows us to understand their changing expectations and how we're delivering upon them through the use of technology and data, but also some things we talked about earlier is these observational mechanisms as well. How are we getting feedback both directly from our customer set or prospect set? How are we understanding which bits of those we should listen to? Yes. Because, like I said earlier, I think that the strategic organization prioritizes, and it should be prioritizing some feedback over others. And then how are we doing the same with our frontline and other customer-touching interfaces throughout the organization? Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess my question, my concern is around this idea about real time, because I think when things become more and more real time, then we end up reacting rather than responding, if you know what I mean.
I think that, yes, I think your point is very well taken. And even when I think about real time, I would be most definitely supportive of what you just said. There has to be intelligence and strategy. This cannot just be a reaction or some machine that is programmed to react. It cannot be that. It has to be more, how are we taking in, interpreting, prioritizing, and making close to real-time decisions in the organization to be able to go out with, as related to our brand and strategy, to deliver the type of experience we're wanting to take.
Right. Okay. Because that brings me on to the next area the next couple of trends that you pick up on is all to do with personalization. But before we get to that, I mean, and related to what you just said, is that I've been concerned about companies achieving the right balance of, technology and the human touch across their customers' experience, and how that should change according to customer groups and also different parts of the journey and things. But I think before we can ever think about designing and then building those type of experiences, we have to ask ourselves, what is our experience sort of strategy? And so I'd be interested, and my hypothesis and kind of my experience kind of tells me that not many companies have tackled the question, what is our experience strategy? And so they have no idea, almost that they have very little idea, or not necessarily a sophisticated idea about the experience that they want to design, therefore they're building to it rather than actually they're building out their kind of channels, and it becomes a little bit haphazard, if you know what I mean.
I agree. I think that in many organizations, even some of the smaller organizations that I've been involved in, we see this Frankenstein approach to customer experience.
Yeah.
Now, the individual functions are making locally optimal decisions. Mm-hmm. So it's well intentioned. It may be that customer support and service has a particular strategy and objective, mm-hmm. and that sales has a particular strategy and objective, and that marketing does, et cetera, and product development. And it goes back to that, I think, one of those macro lenses I was talking about, which is just the increased understanding of brand and how important it is for that brand to be experienced across all factors, interfaces with the customer and with the marketplace.
Yeah. And
for us to really understand what is the position to whom that we are trying to achieve and serving that group.
Sure. So then that brings us to because within all of that, if you like, designing the experience that customers, designing the experience and then building the experience, designing the experience that you want to deliver and then building towards that would hopefully lead us to the realization of the next two trends you've identified. So rather than to steal your glory, why don't you tell us about the next two trends?
Yeah, this comes down to, as we were talking about, a combination of how brands are delivering a more personalized experience to their target customers, and to your point, is how do they build the set of technology and other aspects of engagement around that versus having this more Frankenstein approach where there's independent strategies and perhaps independent technologies mm-hmm. Adopted. And so there is we see increasing trend that's been happening. I think it is increasingly happening where we're coming to expect brands and interactions to be more for me. What are the brands that are for me that I identify with, that I am going to continue to choose over time, and how are they continually convincing me that they are for me, yes. down to even the individual level. And that's got to happen across all channels. Now, one of the balancing acts that come out from this is the balance between personalization and data privacy.
Yes.
Is that in order to, of course, to deliver that type of experience, it does take an understanding of we as customers of a brand and some of the concerns around data there. Now, the bottom line to me is transparency.
Yes.
There's got to be trust in the brand. There's got to be transparent. And the brand has got to deliver value. There's a value equation around in exchange for the information that I am allowing you to use. What are the value back to me? And of course, this past year, and hopefully this is not a continuing trend into 2019, is this past year has been riddled with examples of brands that perhaps have not been as transparent as we would expect and that the market expects with how we're using our data.
Yeah. And do you think a part of that, I mean, that there's an interesting idea that's been introduced by the folks across at Mozilla. There's the CMO over there is a guy called Yasha Kekas Wolf. and they've developed this idea around called lean data, which sort of addresses a lot of these issues, because I think that it seems to be what they're thinking is that many CMOs are getting caught up in this idea of collecting data for data's sake, and the more data you have, the better off you are. But what Yasha and his team at Mozilla are saying is that actually, by introducing this lean data concept, he's almost like questioning, well, if you decide what you want to do, and then you figure out kind of what data you need in order to enable that, then you handle a lot of the conversation around privacy and security by minimizing kind of your approach, being lean in your approach to data. Do you see much or many organizations thinking about in that way, or are we still in the moving from databases to data warehouses to data lakes? And I'm pretty sure at some point in 2019 or 2020, somebody's going to start talking about data planets and galaxies and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Data universe.
Yeah.
I see. So I've actually not read specifically about the lean data approach that you just mentioned, but what I have seen, which corroborates that, is organizations being very conscious about how they are collecting, what they need to collect,
right,
and how long they are keeping those data. And part of it has been a practical matter.
Yes.
We talked about earlier, just the disparate pieces of data we have across the organization and the cost, both initially and ongoing, to collect and consolidate those data into usable fashion for business analysis is expensive.
Yes.
And so just being more pragmatic about understanding what are the important data that to the organization. And then secondarily, most definitely the conversation that I've heard that increasingly at the CMO and CEO and CTO level is because of the brand promise and because of the desire for transparency, how can we minimize what data we really need to be able to drive the type of experience and insights that we need to be successful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it just seems to be that if you the smaller the data set, and maybe this is a simple assumption, but maybe it seems to me that if we've got less and less data, if we have less data required, then it should be easier to protect.
It's easier to protect, and it's just more actionable. My partner, Eric Bradlow at Wharton School, who's actually a data scientist, preaches this all the time, is that big data is not necessarily good data.
Yes.
What are the data that are most important for the organization to make the strategic decisions it needs around CLV and customer experience, et cetera, and make sure we focus on that versus creating the data universe and data galaxies that you and I were just talking about.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, again, it's a challenge. So it's like people want the personalization. They want that customization. They want the if you like, their brands to know them and to remember them. But they also want to do it in a safe and secure kind of way. And so that's the critical balance. And one of the critical challenges that the brands are going to have to keep wrestling with. So,
most definitely.
So now we're on to we've done that. We've covered like 7. What are give us a kind of a flash on the kind of flash through on the kind of the next couple of them. So what's number 8 and what's number 9?
Yeah. So 8 is, we've covered some of this already, is just investing in technology as a leading factor in delivering great CX, and that is looking at technology as the tools and the stack to deliver our intended strategy and customer experience versus the cobbled together Frankenstein approach that, because of the sheer explosion of marketing and other technology that's happened in the last few years and the investments that have gone into that, we see a rationalization by the CMO and usually in direct partnership with the CTO of the organization to have a more refined approach across channels. So that was number 8. And number 9 is something I've spent about half of my life in B2C and half of my life in B2B marketing and product management, with a lot of overlap in between. And the nice thing we see happening increasingly in the marketplace is the understanding of B2B brands that customers don't just put on their rational, pragmatic, ROI-driven hat when they happen to walk in the door, when they make decisions around partners and purchasing, that there are, in fact, some aspects of consumer mindset and some of those expectations that happen at work. And so brands, B2B brands, actually using the brand word, understanding how important that is to have the type of consistent customer experience and perception that we've been talking about throughout this. We see that happening increasingly in the B2B space. And there's some really good examples around whether it's Salesforce. You go to a Dreamforce conference.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to it last year, and you look at the keynotes and Mark Benioff and others that are up there, maybe 5% of the conversation is about product technology and feature functionality. And the rest of the conversation is around worldview, how they're looking to serve and make their customers successful, et cetera, et cetera. And we see this with, particularly I think in leading B2B SaaS organizations who are seeing that and just understanding how they need to target and serve their customers, and understand that while there are a lot of pragmatic decisions they're going to make around pricing and ROI, that there are also some emotional factors that go into that too. And in fact, HBR published in conjunction with Bain earlier in the year the B2B elements of value, and
Yes.
it talks about some of these emotional factors that are increasingly coming into B2B purchase decisions. I think it's a great read on this topic.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. I mean, can I take you back to just something you said in number 8 about investing in technology and this idea? You mentioned sort of 2 words. One, the Frankenstein approach, but also you talked about this rationalization and optimization of an approach. I mean, do you think we might see some organizations actually reducing the number of channels? Like, to put it kind of bluntly, is choosing to be generally above average at a few things rather than generally rubbish at a lot of things?
Yes, I think that what you just said, and now whether that's channel rationalization or whether marketing communication, but yes, is better understanding of the target and the way we need to serve those target segment, and understanding how they prefer to consume information and interact with a brand, and make sure that we are over-delivering and making sure that we are prioritizing the firm's resource to deliver on those expectations and optimizing there versus the try to serve everyone across everywhere.
Yeah. No, because it's, it seems to me that there's data that supports this. I think there was a report from earlier this year from Dimension Data that said the average number of channels that most large organizations are serving their customers over it started off with they're currently serving them over 9, and that number is set to rise to about 11 over the course of either this year or next year. But yet, if you compare that's the average large organization. But if you compare that to some of the leading lights that always come up in conversation around who's doing well in delivering great experiences or great services or so on and so forth, most of those companies, most of those leading companies, no way are they across 9 or 11 different channels. I mean, actually, the number of channels that they're serving the customers over 10, you can tend to count them on sort of one hand, and they tend to be exceptional in each of those channels. And it's almost a bit like the clue is hiding in plain sight. I just wish more people would pay attention and start making some choices about doing less to achieve more.
That's right. And that comes down to that understanding and empathy of who we're serving. And by the way, this is, in my opinion, all the way to the largest brands.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity in my career to steward the Windows brand through the strategy and launch of Windows 10. Mm-hmm. So we literally served billions of customers globally. And even there, as we took the strategy, which had grown over the 30-year history of the brand to try to be everything to everybody, we understood that to make Windows 10 successful, we had to be choiceful around who we were going to serve and how we were going to serve them and what we were going to deliver. And that went out through the entire customer service organization, through the product development, to the way we took it to market. But for instance, there, what we'd learned about, to take support, for example, is that while we needed to have some ability for someone to be able to reach a human when absolutely necessary on the phone, that was actually, most of our target customers were saying that was a bad experience because we had not fulfilled their desire to be able to easily find information online.
Sure.
That's an example of that customer set. Another large brand that I worked for is brand T-Mobile here in the United States.
Uh-huh.
And you see, in fact, I heard one of your podcasts recently talking about it around John Ledger's and the organization's decision for their customers to eliminate chatbots and some of these other technologies and instead have live customer support.
Yeah.
And so there isn't this one-size-fits-all, and we can't be, even at the largest organization, trying to be best at everything. We've got to be best at what matters to our customers.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, I mean, you just gave me a couple of examples about organizations that have made kind of choices. I mean, I guess they will probably be heeding a lot of these kind of trends. But are there any other kind of companies or brands out there you think that are sort of ahead of the curve on a lot of this? And I tell you what would be great is if there were brands that we hadn't actually heard of before or don't get talked about, because I get frustrated with the usual suspects showing up, even though I love that.
Yeah, right.
Even though I love that movie, it's a great movie. There's still usual suspects, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, here's one. I'll give you one that's both you may have never heard of and is actually a B2B brand.
Cool.
And that's a local Seattle company called Outreach.
Okay.
So Outreach is a sales enablement platform that's been growing extremely rapidly, very well funded. Actually, I don't believe even has a CMO, but I actually think is some of the best marketers and some of the best leadership team doing a lot of what we've been talking about today in understanding who their target customer is, and there is a specific segment within sales, a sales organization, and understanding how they need to overserve them and making some really smart decisions about serving them through channels, and even doing things like they acquired a web portal, a website with a bunch of information that's not even branded Outreach, whose mission is to make these sellers more successful. And they understand that by serving that audience that way, and as they become successful and as they want to be more successful in their career, they're going to look for tools like Outreach to be able to serve them. And then building the end-to-end capabilities both within the product, but also in the way that they're going to market and serving those customers, that once they do choose Outreach, that they continue to choose Outreach throughout the rest of the organization's career and for those functions.
Perfect. Well, that's good. I've never heard of them. I shall check them out, and I'm sure everybody else will check them out too. That's great. So let me ask you this then, Jeremy. So we've had the 9 different sort of things, and that's great. Some of it should be new, some of it should be a little bit familiar, but these things keep will keep developing. I mean, are there any other insights or almost like hidden trends that you think actually is something to watch out for? They're not quite there yet, but they're sort of emerging, that you think we need to be paying attention to? I
think we covered a lot of ground today. I encourage people on let's call it the more academic and leading thought area to look at this intersection of behavioral economics, psychology, and neurology. I think we are getting at such a better understanding of the way that we make decisions and the way that individuals and different types of people make decisions, and how we consume information and the perceptions. And that by better understanding even the biology in some cases of the way that works, we can then develop the strategies and then implement the technology tools and other interfaces to best serve us as customers and us as humans. Along those lines are, of course, the increase in specific technologies around machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that will be a continuing trend. Although the AI side of the equation, I think, will probably be something more we're talking about in 2020. One of the senior technical advisors at Microsoft recently said that if you see something written in Python, it is probably machine learning. If you saw something written in PowerPoint, it's probably artificial intelligence.
Right.
And I think that is the nature of those specific technologies.
Okay.
And their current maturities. So
if we were to boil it all down, Jeremy, and if I was to say to you, that's fine, we've kind of rummaged around a bunch of these different things, but I know that some people will be listening to this either in the car or they're on the train to work, or they've got some free time and they're thinking this, and I'm thinking, right, fine. So what's the one thing that you would recommend they do in the face of all of these developments that's going to help them get started? What would you say to them?
I would say, as a gut check, sitting in that car on the train, is, do you truly know who your target customer is? Mm-hmm. And do you feel confident that as much as possible you can understand and try to live a day in their shoes? Mm-hmm. Part one. And then if so, are you helping lead the organization to make choiceful prioritizations in order to best serve that customer? Is really the gut check that I would say is a starting point. And I think that then leads, based on the individual's answer to those actually two questions: where does the organization need to focus to, whether it is technology, whether it is strategy, whether it is other parts of the organization, that we need to start focusing and prioritizing for the 2019.
Perfect. Jeremy, that's been super interesting and kind of really useful, and it just keeps a lot of those things on the radar sort of thing. So there's a lot of spinning plates out there for CMOs or anybody in the kind of experience sort of space, and I'll make sure that I get all that kind of edited and linked up and kind of pushed out sort of in the next kind of few days. But I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for your time today, and also for sharing your insights with us as well. That's been great. So thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I know we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been fun. I think 2019 is going to be a great year.
Fantastic.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsco.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.